Brooklyn Independent Television.
Hello, I'm Randy Piers. Welcome to Sector B, the business of Brooklyn on Brooklyn Independent Television. For 150 years or more, ever since America really started shifting from farm work to factory labor, we've seen ongoing debates between business owners and their employees about what constitutes a fair hourly wage. On one side, what's enough to allow a worker a relatively secure lifestyle? On the other, where does that number start to make it too costly for a business to grow and compete? This issue, it turns out, is still very much alive in New York City in 2011. The Fair Wages for New Yorkers Act, more commonly known as the Living Wage Bill, is under consideration by the City Council. So why not continue the age-old debate here? To talk about the pros and cons of the bill, I'm joined by Brad Lander, City Council member for Brooklyn's 39th District, Dr. Robert Waterman, pastor of Antioch Baptist Church in Bedford-Stuyvesant, and Timothy King, managing partner at Cpex Realty Services in downtown Brooklyn. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you,
Randy.
Councilman, let's start with you, because there's a lot of confusion about what the intention of this bill is and what the parameters are. So can you help us out and sort of give us a good overview of what the bill is trying to achieve?
Great. First of all, thank you so much for the invitation. Wonderful to be here. So the bill is really focused on businesses that receive subsidies, economic development subsidies from the City of New York. Every year, the city, mostly through the Economic Development Corporation, gives out over $2 billion in subsidy of various sorts, tax breaks, financial incentives, and subsidies for a range of businesses. The majority of them go for what you might think of as these big mega projects or large-scale projects, you know, Yankee Stadium, what they call Bronx Gateway Mall, where the Bronx Terminal Market used to be, Willets Point, Coney Island, these large projects, some other projects as well. And when we looked, we saw that quite a lot of the workers on those projects made essentially poverty wages. Quite a lot of folks at Yankee Stadium, Bronx Terminal Market, making just barely above minimum wage, 7 and change an hour, no health benefits. And we thought, why should we, the taxpayers, be giving economic development incentives and subsidies to businesses who are then paying poverty wages to workers when the whole point of those subsidies was to create good living wage jobs? So the Fair Wages for New Yorkers Act would say, if the city gives economic development subsidies to businesses in excess of $100,000, those employers, they've decided to take them, they applied for them, they went, they come after them, this would only apply going forward after the bill was passed, have to pay their workers a living wage. So either $10 an hour with health benefits or $11.50 if they don't pay health benefits. And then we could know if we're going to give a business a subsidy, the workers that are going to be in that business are going to earn a living wage, at least close to enough to raise a family in New York City. So that's the idea of the bill, and the goal is pretty clear. If you're going to get a subsidy, you shouldn't pay poverty wages, you should pay enough to help a family survive in New York.
But isn't it true that this bill sort of extends to also the tenants that ultimately end up in some of these projects?
Yes, well, so if you think about that Bronx, Gateway Mall, the developer, related companies, is who got, several $1 million in subsidies from the city. They then seek tenants, and this bill would say that the tenants in that mall and the companies who do the cleaning are going to have to pay a living wage. And so now that's not your typical small business. This isn't going to hit a mom and pop on a retail strip in any of our neighborhoods. Those folks aren't getting these big economic development subsidies. This is going to hit these large-scale projects. It would mean if you want to open a retail business in one of these subsidized projects, you'd have to agree to create good jobs. But again, if the whole point of our giving the subsidies is to create good jobs in the first place, you can't just say to the developer, well, the people in the back office, have to earn a living wage. You have to say the jobs that are going to be created on site. If Yankee Stadium hires a concession company for the folks who are going to sell the popcorn, or if Related brings in a retail company, then they've got to pay a living wage as well.
So Tim, let me ask you. It seems reasonable to me. We want all New Yorkers to live well. So what's wrong with this bill?
It's a good question, Randy. And to your point, it certainly sounds reasonable, and it's kind of like the equivalent today of 2 chickens in every pot and a car in every garage. It's kind of hard to argue against the notion that everybody should earn enough to raise a family. But I think it's not really clear to say that these programs are designed to create jobs. I think for the most part, jobs are essentially a collateral benefit of the development. And in fact, I think it's safe to say that most of these subsidies are given to encourage either development or redevelopment. And as much as they clearly impact on mega developments, as you're talking about, but virtually every business that I deal with that opens up a retail store takes advantage, for example, of the ICAP program.
But this, the bill as we've drafted it, and the administration themselves say the bill wouldn't even have the power to cover ICAP. So the bill is drafted, and
so
this was
for the
heard at a
purpose
hearing.
of our show here,
very good.
ICAP is?
ICAP is the Industrial and Commercial Abatement Program.
Correct.
And it is a tax break that's given as of right. It's not, there's not a decision made by EDC or someone. It's not a big project. On many retail or small commercial projects, we give a tax incentive for investment in industrial and commercial businesses, and I support that program. It was changed a little bit in Albany a couple of years ago. But the intent of this bill, and there may be some things that we need to clean up in the language, and actually the bill sponsor, Oliver Capel, is working now to try to figure out, after a hearing that the City Council recently had, are there some places we need to tighten the language in the bill? But the intent of the bill is not to cover that ICAP program, not to cover a co-op and condo tax abatement that was discussed. We're not looking to cover these small, kind of everyday projects. The projects that we're targeting, and this is really modeled on the program that Los Angeles has, a very similar program, is targeted at these large commercial and retail projects, and that's the goal of what we're trying to cover.
I hear you, Brad, but I don't think Tim fully understands, because what I'm feeling from him is that he's looking at the small moms and pop situation versus the way you explained the bill itself. So even a kid like me in Bed-Stuy, listening to what you said, I'm saying, okay, why can't the people who make the laws get this? Why can't they support it? Why can't all of City Council get behind the same bill that seems like it makes a difference versus attacking and going against small businesses like yourself who don't get subsidy, I guess?
Well, no, I think on the contrary. As I read the bill, and correct me if I'm wrong, any business that has gross revenues in excess of $1 million and was in a building, for example, that had an ICAP would be impacted by this.
Well, two things. First, that's not how I read the bill, but actually I know Councilmember Capel is clarifying and tightening the language to make sure that it's increasingly clear that ICAP, for example, is not covered, that what we're talking about are not the as-of-right projects. Again, I don't think the City Council, and I think actually the administration, the Bloomberg administration doesn't support this bill, but one area where they and I agree is the council wouldn't have the power to cover ICAP even if we wanted to. That's a program you get automatically. There's no decision making. This is on the big projects where EDC makes a decision to say, and those projects generally get several $1 million of subsidy. And those projects are the ones that we think, a couple of $1 million of taxpayer money, that's enough to pay a living wage.
I get it, Councilman, but real estate's a risky business to begin with. And if you're going to start off by saying, we're even going to limit the potential tenants that could come into your project, is it realistic to believe that these projects will ultimately be built?
I think it is, and here's where the example of Los Angeles, I think, is so powerful. The best testimony at the City Council hearing we had was from a guy, Donald Spivak, the Chief Operating Officer of the Los Angeles Community Redevelopment Agency. And they've got a rule like this in Los Angeles when they give out projects, and they've done over 200 projects now, these large-scale projects that get significant infusions of money, related, for example, who protested this at Kingsbridge Armory up in the Bronx, and who protested it at the Bronx Gateway Mall. They've done projects in Los Angeles, with subsidies from Los Angeles Community Redevelopment Agency where a living wage would require. And he testified at our hearing and said, we've continued to have competitive bids for every one of our projects. We haven't had a single developer walk away because of the living wage requirement.
That being the case, why do related balk in the Bronx?
Well, would they rather not pay a living wage? Sure, they'd rather not pay a living wage. They'd rather take taxpayer subsidies.
I don't think Related was paying any wages. I think Related's issue was that their tenants, their potential tenants, said, if you build it, we're not going to come.
I actually don't think that's true at all. I think actually in the Bronx that Related was actually willing to come in and pay a living wage, have their tenants be required to pay a living wage. and that there was a political decision made by the Bloomberg administration that they didn't want to see living wage policy advanced. I honestly don't know why the Bloomberg administration is so against this policy. To me, the idea that you'd want to give developers a couple million in subsidies and not require them just to pay $10 an hour, we're not talking about more. And I think Related's done it in Los Angeles. The COO of Los Angeles Redevelopment Agency said they've had plenty of people willing to do it. So I understand why they don't want to, but I still think they would.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure, shoot.
How many people would you say, if you say, granted, you make $1 million, how many employees would you have?
I want to go back to the $1 million is a threshold of the gross revenues of a company. If your revenues exceed $1 million, you will be impacted by this. So not for anything, a corner gas station has revenues higher than $1 million, but they may spend $900,000 to buy the gas that they're selling for $1 million. I don't think that makes them a big business.
But we're not giving them a big taxpayer subsidy for economic development.
But under this legislation, they would be impacted.
No,
let me
they
ask
wouldn't.
this question, particularly of you, Pastor Waterman. Something you're familiar with in Bed-Stuy. Grocers and salaries, entry-level salaries in the grocery industry tend to be slightly above minimum wage, probably not living wage. Yet there's been a big push to try and get quality grocers to move into underserved communities to bring in fresh foods and fresh vegetables and all the other things. There's a concern by the grocery industry that the incentive for them to move into some of these communities will no longer be there if the living wage bill goes into effect.
Well, it all depends on who. Are we talking about knocking out the bodegas? See, now we got this competition that's dealing with the big groceries that come in for the fresh fruit. Why can't we actually reverse it and make good with the bodegas that are there and give them what they need to bring up their stock? But yet we want to knock them out, bring in a big organization or a big grocery producer and allow them to operate just like on Fulton Avenue. Prices are too high. How many people are walking down to Fulton? They're still going down to their local bodega whose family-owned business and who's there in the community. They're not going to walk 6, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night when the sun goes down and walk down to Fulton.
But to be fair, the bodegas generally are not carrying the level of fresh produce and other commodities that some of these other larger grocers do carry.
Right, but you want to bring in another business, right?
Yeah.
So if we're talking about government subsidy and stuff like that, why can't we deal with the bodegas in the same manner?
Well,
if we're going to do it, we're going to turn it over.
To some extent, I think the bodega could or should be eligible, for example, an ICAP, and there isn't any reason why if a bodega wanted to improve their store and carry more produce and whatever it is, for the most part, I think their concern is they're restricted by the size of a store. If you have a 1,500 or 2,000 square foot store, there's a finite amount of products that you can stock. Whereas a 10 or 20,000 square foot supermarket gives you the space to carry more products and employ more people. And
you might be right, Tim, but yes, if there's a bodega on the corner of Lexington, then there's a bodega on the corner of Lewis, then there's a bodega on the corner of Green. If you add all those bodegas together, it'll be the size of a supermarket.
No
It'll
question.
just be locally, that people don't have to go to one place, they can actually go to a corner. I believe in the 8 block radius, that anything that you want should be capitalized within that vicinity versus everybody in long lines, waiting to park, streets blocked up, all that stuff. Bodegas, for me, are good. They're just broken down to minimum sizes where people can actually go in and develop what we call relationships within our communities.
So let me ask you a question, though. Let's say, because the bill is still being amended, Councilmember Capel is amending it, and I think it's a productive conversation talking about what we should be targeting and focusing on. I don't think we should be covering those bodegas, whether they get ICAP or not, the mom and pop businesses. The bill currently does cover manufacturing businesses, but I would actually like it to exempt manufacturing businesses, and I've told this to the sponsors.
For example.
But here's my question. No, and I said at the hearing, and I'll say it again today. I'm working hard, and I believe that the next version of the bill will exempt Navy Yard, those businesses in the Navy Yard who are creating hundreds, thousands collectively of blue-collar jobs, and that it shouldn't cover manufacturing, which is more difficult to do in Brooklyn these days, and we want people doing it. So I'm for those incentives. What this bill is designed to cover, and maybe it needs to be made more clear in the language, but I guess I would like to ask you, let's assume we can make this bill very clear that what we're covering are those larger commercial and retail projects, things like Atlantic Yards or Willets Point or Yankee Stadium. I just haven't heard anyone say a reason why on those mega projects, if we're going to give them a few $1 million each, that we shouldn't insist that everybody there earns at least $10 an hour. So if your criticism is let's make sure we're careful in what we cover, I agree with you 100%. But I still haven't heard a reason why not insist on a living wage for job creation on those mega projects.
Well, let's go back to the point that, the bodega should be able to compete with the supermarket. Why should a mega project, by virtue of being a mega, be singled out and be treated differently?
Because we're giving it several million dollars in economic development subsidies of our tax dollars that EDC decides on a project-by-project basis to give them.
If that is the case, why then on a project basis can't they make the decision, okay, this qualifies, this doesn't? Why have a sweeping act of legislation that's an umbrella that covers the world? And secondly, go back to the notion that I'm just confused why a big project should be treated differently than a small project.
Well, maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe we shouldn't give them several $million of taxpayer subsidies.
Let's talk about. Can we talk about the $7 million?
I'd be glad not to subsidize
let's talk about the $7 million.
Pay poverty wages.
Do you think when the several $1 million is given, does someone get a check? Is some developer spending his summer in Costa Rica with those millions of dollars?
Part, the developers of these projects make a lot more than the workers at Yankee Stadium or Bronx Terminal Market who are making $7.50, $7.75 an hour. Yes,
no question about that. But go back to the opening remarks about real estate's a risky business. These guys are presumably gambling with a fair amount of their own money in the game.
Sometimes I wonder. We bailed a lot of people out, and I think folks who took risks have seemed to come through the financial collapse pretty well, while workers are the ones who have taken it on the chin. So if they want to take the risk with their money and they're not asking for taxpayer subsidies, then absolutely this bill would not cover them. But if they come to us for tax breaks...
I have a question. Could this bill in any way undermine the ability for these companies to negotiate a dedicated community benefits agreement on a project-to-project basis?
Well, I think what this would do is raise the floor. I actually think it would help the negotiation of community-specific benefits if you started from an understanding that every worker was going to get paid at least a living wage. And so now you wouldn't have to have, different representatives of workers come in and just say, and you could use Atlantic Yards as an example. I think had it been clear that all the workers were going to automatically be paid a living wage because the law said if you got a subsidy you were going to get a benefit, maybe there would have been a better dialogue with the community about what the community wanted on the project. So you can't make a law that says, this community really needs a playground here and the appropriate investment for a developer to make is that playground, or adjust the height of the building this way, or deal with the traffic pattern. That's got to be done on a case-by-case basis. But I don't think it helps us when you also are negotiating on a case-by-case basis what the wages of the workers are. I think it would be better, at least if the minimum floor was set in the law. Again, this is only where we're providing subsidy, and then there'll still be negotiations, but at least for starters we'll know that if we're putting taxpayer dollars in, we're not paying for poverty wage jobs.
It sounds like you're making a proposition that there should be this quid pro quo, that if you get a subsidy, you should provide the living wage.
Yes, absolutely.
But isn't the quid pro already there? Or have all of the subsidies that have been given already just been a boondoggle for developers and a squandering of taxpayer monies by city officials? Hasn't the existing, I'm sorry, that was a loaded question.
No, I'm not sure about the answer.
I do. I have the answer. The quid pro is that those projects would not have been built, those properties would not have been renovated without the benefit of those subsidies. Look, when you were at the Fifth Avenue Committee,
a big question.
1 second. Every property you ever renovated at the Fifth Avenue Committee, was there a subsidy involved?
That was to create affordable housing for low-income families.
Well,
that was the public purpose, was creating affordable housing for low-income families. And I don't believe that creating, commercial and retail malls, is necessary. Like, Albee Square Mall in downtown Brooklyn is a public benefit worth our subsidy if the jobs it's creating are good jobs. This is the Economic Development Corporation. Their goal, their mission is to create good jobs for New Yorkers.
So can I ask a question? It says a mother with 2 children, right? And she's working real hard, right? She works at Yankee Stadium, right? And she's on her feet giving out hot dogs and all day she's just
working
out there working hard.
Person, sure.
And yet she doesn't have minimum wage. Right? Or she does have minimum wage, but not enough. She got to go all the way from Brooklyn to the Bronx. She's got to travel back. Now she has to put her kids in daycare. So now she has to extend some hours. If she gets late, she has to call them up, and the daycare said, you got to pay me $50 more.
Yep.
So now if she doesn't get the living wage, and living wage or you know, the living wage, if she does it because she's making minimum, and she has to put in so much hours. What I'm finding out in my community is that we have to put in so many hours just to get enough to pay rent, to pay gas.
I'm all over that. I'm all over that. My very first job was working, as I told you, with city housing, and I can recall like it was yesterday, coming home with a Teamsters contract, telling my wife then, you know what, we're going to go from $5,700 a year to $9,000, and we'll be on Easy Street. And I supplemented my income working as a super, living in the basement of a building, doing odd jobs. There's no question that it's not easy, the circumstances you're describing. But you're going to create two tiers of workers. You could theoretically, the person who works at Yankee Stadium who gets the living wage, now the guy who's working across the street selling hot dogs in the bodega, he's working for $8 an hour. It seems to me that we're creating a two-tiered...
Yeah, but no, this is, I mean, you look, there's big inequality in New York City, and we unfortunately have a lot of jobs that don't pay enough to put food on the table. And the wealthiest 1% of households who used to take home 34% of the city's income 20 years ago now take home 44% of the city's income. So there's a bigger problem here. We can't solve all of it. I agree with you. But if we're going to take $2 billion a year of taxpayer money, shouldn't we say for those projects we're going to raise the floor and we're going to ensure, if we provide subsidies, that those workers earn a little more? Do I wish we could do something for the person who's selling hot dogs across the street?
But why
I
wish
we could.
But why is
I
it
think
that
what we have to do is we have to have a start somewhere. And I think the problem is nobody wants to start. So we need a start. Can we start with what we're talking about and doing the subsidy piece, and then move from there? Then we can deal with that guy across the hall?
I could say this, in any one of these mega projects, and we have to think about not just the ones that we're contemplating today, but the ones that may come down the road. I mean, $1 million is, I mean, $100,000 is not a large threshold.
Yep.
You do, by virtue of having the wage requirement, exclude mom and pops from moving into that type of space.
Well, first, I think the $100,000 that you raise is a fair question. I don't know. I mean, the average that these mega projects have gotten in subsidies is well over $1 million, usually several million. So I think you raise a good point, and one of the other things I think we should go back and look at is what's the right threshold? What's the right threshold for how much subsidy? What's the right threshold for the businesses that should be covered? You know, if you're going to operate a sunglass cart, you know, I don't know whether the sunglasses cart vendor, you know, should be covered.
Look at the
So I think you
home.
raise some important questions that we've got to get right in the second version of the bill. But I still think at its core, and I still haven't heard anyone say that the person selling the hot dogs or the popcorn at Yankee Stadium, or the retail clerks at that Bronx Gateway Mall, or the projects like that, you know, and the majority of the workers we're talking about being covered are working for larger businesses. They're often retail businesses. And we, the taxpayers, are providing a big subsidy. So I think we should work on the details, but I still think, you know, if we agree that, you know, 80, 85, 90% of the workers we're talking about covering ought to get a living wage, let's figure out where to draw the line for the others.
Wait, 1 second. Ought to get a living wage, but who provides that? And how weird is it that you're going to suggest that businesses that locate in these buildings have to pay it, but the guy across the street isn't? You're creating such a
but isn't it unfair in the first? I mean, why are we giving subsidies to that guy in the first place if we didn't give them across the street? Maybe the hot dog vendor across the street's going to say, "Why did you give that big project several $1 million in taxpayer subsidies?" So if you want things to be equal, we shouldn't be providing these subsidies at all. I'm just saying, if we are going ahead to provide these millions in subsidies,
I could endorse the level playing field concept. Everyone should play by the same rules. So if everyone didn't get a benefit, it would be cool. But can I just give you one more real...
$2 billion that we're giving to these big businesses and put it to job training and put it to programs that would help workers get more education and grow and earn more themselves.
Then we can be at the same level.
I think we're all on board with that. But can I use one more real world example? I'm almost embarrassed to say I sleep in New Jersey. So last night on the way home I stopped to buy gas. And at the gas station in Perth Amboy, which is just across the Arthur Kill from Staten Island, gas is 20 cents a gallon cheaper, and they pump it for you. Now, what's the difference between that gas and the gas in Staten Island? There's no more octane in it, it doesn't give you any better features. It's the difference between the taxing and the regulatory situation in Richmond County and in Middlesex County. And if you take a little ride down 35 there from Perth Amboy into Woodbridge, you could drive down any of those streets and think you were in Flatbush or Canarsie or any neighborhood in Brooklyn. But the taxpayers in those homes are paying $6,000, $8,000, $10,000 a year in taxes. The same house in Brooklyn is paying 10% of that. Now, they don't have a policeman standing on everybody's porch in Jersey, The fire truck's not parked on the corner. They're not picking up the garbage twice a day. Why is it that homeowners here are paying a tiny fraction and the businesses are paying the big fraction? You know, you go back to the level playing field, that's almost where we need to start this conversation.
So that, you know, that's an interesting and broader question that we could look at. I'm just, you know, I think what we're saying is where we are deciding to give millions in taxpayer subsidies, it's also appropriate for us to decide, you know what, those workers at least have to earn $10 an hour. If we wanted to have a bigger conversation about what we should be subsidizing and what we shouldn't be subsidizing, let's come back and have another conversation about it another day.
I'm cool with that.
So let me turn to Pastor Waterman and give you the last word here.
Well, from where I sit at and where I live at in Bed-Stuy, the young men are asking me every day, can I get a job? Now, the average young man that I encounter is somebody who has been either incarcerated before and coming out, probably have a GED, probably have sold some weed. And if a weed bag costs $10 an hour.
No, it costs less than that. But
$10.
would you rather?
How about
an hour? Why?
I think
because
well,
it's a bag. Because what I'm trying to be real with this is because the fact is that if a $10 bag and I'm going to be out there an hour, and you won't even give me $10, which job am I going to take?
Here. On that note, I want to thank all three of you for being here. This is a very important issue. It was a great debate, and thank you all for your participation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Randy.
Okay. That's it this month from Sector B. To see past episodes of our show, go to our website at brickartsmedia.org/BIT and then click on Sector B. And you can follow us on Facebook or Twitter on BK Independent TV. I'm Randy Piers. Thanks for watching.
Watch this and other Brooklyn Independent Television episodes online at brickartsmedia.org/BIT.